"Darling, your mom changed the password. I can't use her card anymore." That one sentence echoed through my living room like a slap I didn't deserve. It came from the other end of the phone, my daughter-in-law's sharp, irritated voice breaking the morning quiet I had grown so used to. I was sitting by the window, sipping my tea, the same way I had done every morning since I retired. The sun was still soft, spreading gold across my living room rug. My cat, Daisy, was curled up near my feet, purring softly. Everything felt calm, peaceful, until that call. My son Michael had handed his phone to his wife, thinking it was something urgent. Instead, she started speaking as if I owed her an explanation, as if I had done something wrong. She was angry because I had changed the password on my own debit card, the one she had been using for months, for small things, as she used to call them. But there was nothing small about the amount I'd been watching disappear from my account. Hebra, I didn't always feel this cautious. There was a time when helping family was second nature to me, when I believed love meant giving without keeping count. Michael was my only son, the one I'd raised after my husband passed away too soon. I poured everything into that boy, my time, my strength, my savings. And when he brought his wife Jessica into our lives, I told myself to open my heart again. Jessica was all smiles at first, polite, sweet-voiced, calling me Mom even before the wedding. She'd help me in the kitchen, ask about recipes, and insist on making me tea whenever she came over. I thought, God has blessed me with another daughter. Ibrahi, but blessings can turn into lessons. It started small, as these things always do. Ibrahi, Mom, Michael had said one afternoon. Jessica forgot her wallet at home. Can she use your card just for the groceries? I'll pay you back next week. Burr smiled. Of course, darling, it's just groceries. But the next week came and went, and no one mentioned it again. Ibrsh, then it W. As gas money, then online shopping, then, oh, the rent is due, and we're short this month. Burry, I didn't even notice at first. I just saw my account moving, a few dollars here, a few hundred there, until one day my balance dropped lower than I'd seen it in years. Still, I said nothing. Because that's what mothers do. We tell ourselves they'll learn, that things will settle down, that kindness will come back around. Ibri, but kindness, when it's taken for granted, becomes permission. The day I decided to change the password wasn't planned. It happened after I got a text notification from my bank. Another purchase I hadn't made. Bro, a luxury skincare set. Over $300. When I checked the order details, my hands trembled. The delivery address wasn't mine. It was Jessica's. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen, my tea gone cold beside me. Then I called the bank, reset everything, and finally, for the first time, said no. Burhe. It felt strange, powerful but painful. Like shutting a door I knew. Ver thought I'd have to close on family. So when Jessica called me that morning, her voice full of anger instead of apology, I knew something had shifted. She wasn't embarrassed, she wasn't sorry, she was offended, as if she had every right to my hard-earned money. Why would you do that? She snapped through the phone. Brew softly. Jessica, I said softly, because it's my account. I needed to take care of some things. Abri. Oh, come on, it's not like I was stealing. We're family. You said you wanted to help. That word family burned on my tongue. Abri, help. Family. Words I had lived by, now used against me. Before I could respond, she muttered something about how I was being dramatic and ended the call. I sat there for a while, looking out the window at the birds pecking at the grass, trying to calm the ache in my chest. I didn't know then that this was only the beginning, that her anger would twist into something far uglier, because when people are used to taking from you, the moment you say no, you become the villain in their story. That night, Michael came over alone. He stood in my kitchen, leaning against the counter, avoiding my eyes. Mom, he said quietly, Jess is really upset. She said you embarrassed her. I I turned from the stove, wiping my hands on a towel. Embarrassed her? I changed my password, Michael, on my card. Aber, he sighed, rubbing his temples. You know how she is? She takes things personally. You could have told us first. Aber told you? I almost laughed. I've been telling you for months that the spending was getting out of hand. You promised to pay it back. His silence said everything. Aber. I realized then that it wasn't just Jessica. My son, my sweet boy, had been fine with it all along. Maybe he even encouraged it. That realization hurt more than anything she could have said. Later that night, as I sat alone at the kitchen table, I remembered something my late husband once told me. Boundaries aren't walls, love. They're fences with gates. You open them when you trust so. Me only, but you close them when they stop respecting your home. It took me years to understand what that really meant. Now, as I looked at the quiet glow of my phone screen, still showing the last text from Jessica, you made things awkward for everyone. I finally did. Aber. I wasn't trying to make things awkward. I was trying to make things right. And deep down, I knew. This was only the start of a storm that had been waiting to break for a long, long time. A few days passed after that tense phone call, and my house felt heavier than usual, not with noise or clutter, but with silence, the kind of silence that follows a change people aren't ready to accept. Bro. I thought maybe things would calm down after a while, that Jessica would see sense, and Michael would realize how unfair they'd been. But instead, something strange began to happen. Little things started to go missing from my home. Bro. At first, I didn't think much of it. A bottle of my favorite perfume, half used, was suddenly gone from my dresser. Then my grocery items, butter, sugar, snacks, started disappearing faster than usual. I blamed myself, thinking I was getting forgetful. But deep down, something didn't feel right. The oddest moment came one Friday evening when I returned from church. I found my front door unlocked. I always locked it. Always. When I stepped inside, everything looked normal, until I noticed the faint smell of Jessica's perfume lingering in the air. Sweet, floral, unmistakable. That same evening, I called Michael. Did you and Jessica stop by earlier? I asked, keeping my voice calm. Bursts. He paused. Yeah. Jess wanted to drop off that lasagna you like. There was no lasagna on my counter? I didn't say anything, though. I just hummed in response and let it go. But that night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering why my home, my safe little world, suddenly didn't feel safe anymore. The next week, my phone bill came. There were charges for streaming services and online subscriptions I had never signed up for. When I called the company, they told me those accounts were registered under my email address. That's when I remembered. Months ago, Jessica had helped me set up my phone when it started acting up. She'd asked for my email password to fix a sync issue. Now, everything started to connect. And the missing items, the strange transactions. The tone in her voice when I changed my card password. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about control and entitlement. I tried to keep calm, but it was hard. Michael dropped by a few days later. I made him his favorite, chicken stew with cornbread, hoping maybe, if we sat down like we used to, he'd open up to me. He walked in, looking distracted, scrolling through his phone. Mom, you changed your Wi-Fi password too? He asked, half joking but with that same uneasy tone I'd heard before. Yes, I said, setting his bowl down. I needed to update the network. It wasn't secure anymore. He smiled, but it didn't reach his E. Yes. You really don't trust anyone these days, huh? That one line, cut deeper than it should have. Trust. Such a small word, and yet it carried the weight of everything I'd lost since Jessica came into the family. I didn't answer him right away. I just stirred my tea and said softly, I trust people who give me a reason to." He shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable, then quickly changed the subject. We ate in silence after that, the kind of silence that builds a wall between two people who used to understand each other without words. Aber. Later that evening, after he left, I sat by the window again, the same spot where I had heard Jessica's angry voice for the first time. The sun was setting outside, painting the sky in streaks of pink and orange. It should have been peaceful, but instead, all I could feel was a quiet ache in my chest. That's when Daisy, my cat, leapt onto the windowsill, knocking over a folded receipt that had been tucked behind the curtain. It wasn't mine. Burke. It was faux. A boutique clothing store downtown. The name on it read, Jessica Miller. Aberfer, the payment method, my debit card. The date, 2 days after I'd changed the password. Abroth. My hand trembled. How could that be possible? The realization hit me like a slow wave. Jessica must have still had access to my account somehow. Maybe through the online banking app she'd helped me set up months ago. Maybe through my email. The betrayal wasn't new, it was ongoing. At night, I barely slept. I replayed every moment in my head, every favor, every time she'd insisted on helping with my phone, my bank app, my Wi-Fi, and every time I'd said yes, because I wanted to be a kind mother-in-law. But they didn't want her law because I didn't want to seem ungrateful for her help. Didn't want to seem ungrateful for her help. Now I realized, kindness without boundaries becomes an invitation for misuse. The next morning I made an appointment at my bank. The young man at the counter listened patiently as I explained my situation. When I told him about my daughter-in-law, his eyes softened. He said gently. This happens more often than you'd think, especially with family members. He helped me create a new account, set new security questions, and lock down my email. It took nearly 2 hours. By the time I was done, I felt lighter, but also sadder than I had in a long time, because protecting yourself from strangers is one thing. But from family? That leaves a scar you don't see but feel every day. When I got home, I found a text waiting for me. Burke, it was from Jessica. Burke, Jessica, so you went to the bank. Wow. I guess we're doing this now. Burke. I stared at that message for a long while, my fingers hovering over the screen. Then I set the phone down. Burke, no reply. Kibruri, not this time. Because some arguments aren't worth having, especially when the truth is already louder than anything words could fix. But I had no idea what Jessica was planning next. And soon, she would find a way to turn everyone, including Michael, against me. A week later, I was invited to Michael and Jessica's hoe. It had been months since we'd shared a meal together. And after everything that happened, I hesitated. But Michael's voice on the phone sounded different that day, softer, almost pleading. "Mom," he said, "Jessica made your favorite roast chicken. She wants to make peace. Please come. Brr for peace." That word carried so much hope, and yet something in my chest told me not to go. Still, a mother's heart is weak when it comes to her children. So, I went. When I arrived, Jessica greeted me with that same bright smile she always wore in front of others. Too bright, too polished. She hugged me quickly, her perfume clouding the air. "Ibrahim, Mrs. Miller! It's been too long," she said cheerfully. I wanted to remind her I was her mother-in-law, not a guest. But I bit my tongue. Ibrahim Michael looked happy to see me, relieved even. The table was beautifully set, candles glowing, soft music playing. For a moment it felt like old times, but underneath it all, I felt tension. Like invisible strings pulling everyone's smiles a little too tight. We ate in quiet politeness for a while. Jessica served me extra portions, complimented my dress, and even laughed at my small jokes. I wanted to believe her, I truly did. Then, during dessert, she leaned back in her chair and said casually, so, I heard you changed all your bank info." The fork froze halfway to my mouth. Michael looked from her to me. "What's that about, Mom?" "Key Bruss." I took a slow breath. "Yes, I did. I had some suspicious charges, so I decided to be cautious." "Kebrew," Jessica smiled faintly. "Suspicious?" "Oh, come on, Mrs. Miller. You probably just forgot what you bought. It happens at your age." That stung. Michael chuckled lightly, maybe trying to diffuse the tension, but I caught the quick, satisfied look in Jessica's eyes. I looked straight at her and said calmly, "Abrahi, maybe." But the store names looked very familiar. She blinked just once, and that tiny flicker in her expression told me everything. Shebrew. The conversation turned awkward after that. Michael tried steering it to safer topics, but the damage was done. I could feel Jessica's glare burning through me, even when she smiled. After dessert, I excused myself to use the restroom. On my way down the hall, I passed by Michael's office, and there on the desk, I saw something that made my blood run cold, a small stack of unopened letters, all addressed to me. My handwriting, my address, but the corner of each envelope was torn like someone had peeked inside before resealing them. I froze. Then I noticed one lying open, a letter from my insurance company. I saw the words account update and beneficiary change request. The new listed beneficiary, Michael Miller. I felt my knees go weak. That letter had never reached me. Which meant someone, Jessica, had been intercepting my mail. I quickly slipped the letter into my purse, my heart racing. I didn't want to believe what I was starting to understand, but denial was no longer possible. This wasn't just about stolen money, More. This was something darker, planned, deliberate, calculated. When I returned to the table, Jessica was pouring wine for Michael, whispering something that made him smile faintly. But when she saw me, her face changed, that same fake warmth returning instantly. "Bro, everything okay?" she asked sweetly. "Yes," I said, steadying my voice. "I just remembered something I need to take care of at home." I stood up to leave, and that's when she said something that froze me in my tracks. You know, Mrs. Miller, sometimes holding on to things too tightly only causes pain. Maybe it's time to let go. Of control, of money, of everything. It was such a simple sentence, but the way she said it, the chill in her tone, made it sound almost like a threat. Michael didn't notice. He was busy checking his phone again. I didn't respond. I just smiled faintly, thanked them for dinner, and walked out before my voice could betray how shaken I was. That night, I sat alone in my kitchen, the unopened letter. Beside my teacup, my hands were trembling. Every moment she'd everything. Every moment she'd offered to help. Every time she'd smiled too sweetly. Every gift that came with invisible strings. Jessica wasn't after peace. She was after control over me, my finances, and now, apparently, my assets. I felt foolish. I felt betrayed. But more than that, I felt scared. Because if she had gone this far, what was she willing to do next? The following morning, I went to the post office. The clerk confirmed my worst fear. My mail had been redirected temporarily through a change of address request made online. The request had used my name, but a different phone number. I asked them to cancel it immediately. When I got home, I called Michael. He sounded tired. "Mom, can we talk later? Jess and I are dealing with some stuff." His tone was distant, distracted, almost as if he didn't have the time or space to hear me anymore. So I hung up quietly, and that's when I made a decision that would change everything. If Jessica thought she could play this game quietly, I would show her I wasn't as weak as she believed. I started gathering everything. Every receipt, every bank statement, every piece of evidence I could find, and I began writing a letter, not to Michael, not to Jessica, but to my lawyer, because sometimes when the people closest to you refuse to protect you, you must protect yourself, even if it means exposing the truth about your own family. But before I could send that letter, Something happened at Michael's wedding that would blow everything open and leave everyone speechless. Brewer. The wedding wasn't supposed to be grand. Michael and Jessica had already been married legally for 3 years, but this ceremony, as she called it, was her real wedding. The one with the white dress, the vows, and the photos for social media. She invited everyone, her family, her friends, people from Michael's office, even distant cousins I hadn't seen in decades. And though part of me wanted to refuse, my son's voice over the phone changed everything. "Brookie, Mom, please come," he said. "Jessica really wants to make things right with you." Brush soft patch words, "make things right," felt like a soft patch over a deep wound. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Brewery. The ceremony took place at a grand estate just outside town. The morning was bright, almost unnaturally so. The air smelled of lilies and champagne, and laughter floated through the garden like music. I wore a soft lavender dress and held my small purse close. Inside it, a single envelope, the one Jessica never meant for me to see. When I arrived, Jessica was radiant in her white gown, surrounded by photographers and bridesmaids. But when her eyes met mine, her smile faltered just a little, like a crack on glass. "Brookie, Mrs. Miller," she said smoothly, gliding toward me. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "Brr, I wouldn't miss my son's wedding," I replied. Her eyes flicked briefly to my purse, and I caught the tiniest twitch at the corner of her J. During the ceremony, I sat in the front row, watching the trembling voice. He looked happy, or maybe just hopeful. Jessica's smile was perfect, practiced, almost cinematic. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife again, the crowd cheered and cameras flashed like fireworks. But inside, something in me felt unsettled. The music, the clapping, it all blurred into a dull hum, because I knew something the rest of them didn't. I knew what she'd done behind those pretty smiles and wedding plans, and today, for the first time, though not from me directly. At the reception, I was seated at a long table near the couple. The room was glowing with fairy lights, the smell of food filling the air. People toasted, laughed, and danced. Beside me sat a small boy, Jessica's nephew, about 6 years old. He was sweet, curious, and talkative. "Bro," he tugged at my sleeve and whispered, "Ibrikri, Grandma, do you know the secret?" I smiled gently. "What secret, darling?" He leaned closer, cupping his hand to my ear. Bruce, Jessica said, "You weren't supposed to come. She said you'd ruin her plan." My heart stopped. "Abri, what plan?" I asked softly. "Say, brr." He looked around, then pointed under the table. "Abri, she hid a card down there. She said if you came, she'd use it anyway." "Brr." I froze. I bent slowly, pretending to adjust my shoe, and there, taped to the underside of the tablecloth, was a small, shiny debit card. My card. Abri. I sat up slowly, my breath caught between fury and heartbreak. That child didn't understand what he'd just revealed, but I did. Jessica hadn't just wanted to use me. She wanted to humiliate me. To remind me in front of everyone that she still held power over what was mine. As the toasts began, I excused myself quietly and walked toward the back of the hall, toward the catering staff area. There, I found one of the waiters, a kind young man, and asked him for help. "Would you please bring that card from under the head table?" I said softly. Discreetly. He nodded without question, and moments later he handed it to me, confusion in his eyes. I thanked him, slipped the card back into my purse, and returned to my seat as if nothing happened. A few minutes later, the DJ called everyone's attention. Jessica stood up, glass in hand, glowing under the spotlight. "I just want to thank everyone for being here," she said, smiling. "Especially Mom Miller, for teaching me that family is complicated." People laughed lightly. I didn't. She looked at me then, that same smug, rehearsed look, and said, Abri, and speaking of family, I thought it'd be fun to share a little surprise gift she gave me, something that helped us so much. She reached under the table, the same spot where the card had been. Her hand searched, her smile faltering as she realized it was gone. Seabury, then she looked up and saw me holding it. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. I stood slowly. My voice trembled, but it was steady enough for the microphone to catch. I believe this is what you're looking for, I said, lifting the card. Eber, her whispers rippled through the hall. Michael turned toward me. Eber, her mom, what's going on? Jessica's smile cracked entirely. That's not what it looks like, she stammered. We're her. Yebrai looked at her, the daughter-in-law I once prayed to love like my own. I think, I said softly, it's exactly what it looks like. Bruce, Michael stood frozen, torn between us. The guests were whispering now, phones out, cameras forgotten. I turned to him and handed him the letter, the one from the insurance company. Ibrahim. This was sent to me months ago, I said. Someone changed my account access. Someone redirected my mail. And now, this card under the table. Michael read the letter, his face draining of color. Jessica, tell me you didn't. Eberg, I did it for us, she snapped suddenly, her voice trembling. Your mother has everything and she treats us like children. I just wanted what was fair. Abershi fair. Avery, that word burned through the air like fire. Abersh. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I just looked at her and said, Abrahi, I gave you my trust, my son's heart, a place in my family. But you wanted my peace too. Jessica's breath hitched. People were staring. Cameras were recording. And in that moment, I saw her world begin to crack. Not because of what I said, but because she finally realized she couldn't manipulate this story anymore. Bruhu Michael turned to her slowly, his voice breaking. You did all this behind my back? Jessica reached for him, but he stepped away. Her eyes darted to the crowd, her mask completely gone. Ibrahim. I walked quietly toward the door, every step heavy but sure. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't the one trembling. Behind me, I heard her begin to cry, not the kind of cry that came from guilt, but the kind that comes when someone finally loses control. I burst. I didn't look back, because sometimes silence says everything words can't. At night, when I got home, I placed the card, the letter, and my wedding invitation into a small box and locked it away. Not as evidence, but as a reminder. Debur, that love without respect isn't love at all, and family without trust is just a house full of strangers. The night after the wedding felt heavier than any storm I'd ever known. When I got home, I didn't turn on the lights. I sat by the kitchen window, letting the moon spill across the table, pale and cold. My phone buzzed endlessly. Messages from relatives, friends, even neighbors who'd somehow already seen the videos from the reception. Brooke. I didn't open a single one. Instead, I made myself a cup of tea. Chamomile, the kind my late husband used to brew when I couldn't sleep. The clock ticked slow and hollow. Bruhra. Every sound, the hum of the fridge, the soft rattle of wind, felt louder than my thoughts. By morning, the call stopped. Silence had taken their place. Ibrahim, but then, around 9 a.m., the doorbell rang. I didn't need to look through the peephole to know who it was. Ibrahim Michael stood on my porch, his shoulders slumped, his eyes red and tired. For a moment, we just stared at each other. Ibrawi, he finally said, Mom, can I come in? Ibrawi nodded and stepped aside. He walked in slowly, like a man who had aged overnight. The air between us was thick with all the words neither of us had said. I didn't know. I swear to you, Mom, I had no idea. I believed him, because in his voice there wasn't guilt, only heartbreak. He sat down, elbows on his knees, face buried in his hands. She told me she was helping manage things while I focused on work. I thought she was just trying to make things easier for us. I sighed softly. You wanted to believe her. We all want to believe the ones we love. He nodded, tears welling in his eyes. She's staying with her sister now. She said she needs time, but I don't know what's left to fix. I reached over, resting my hand on his shoulder. Sometimes, I said, when trust breaks, you can glue it back together, but it never looks the same. He looked up at me then, like a child again, searching for comfort he didn't know how to ask for. A few weeks passed. Life settled into a quiet rhythm, but nothing felt the same. Jessica didn't call, though word spread that she'd tried to explain her side to anyone who would listen. She said it was all a misunderstanding, that she only borrowed the card temporarily. But truth doesn't bend that way. Michael came by often, not to talk about her, but just to sit with me. Sometimes we shared dinner, sometimes we just watched old movies, letting the silence fill the space where pain still lingered. It was strange how heartbreak could rebuild bridges that had been neglected for years. One afternoon I found an envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was Jessica's handwriting, shaky, uneven. Mrs. Miller, I know you probably won't forgive me, but I wanted to try anyway. I was scared. I thought money could give me control, that it could make me feel secure. But I see now that it only made me lose everything that mattered. I didn't deserve your kindness, but I hope one day you'll remember me for more than my mistakes. Jessica. I read it twice. My hands trembled, but not from anger, from something softer, because I could feel, through those words, the kind of regret that only comes when a person finally faces themselves. I didn't write back. Not because I didn't forgive her, but because sometimes silence is forgiveness, the quiet kind that lets the past rest. Months rolled on. Michael filed for separation, though he didn't talk about it much. He started volunteering at the community center on weekends, helping with youth programs. He told me once, I just want to do something good again, Mom. Something honest. That made me proud, in the quiet way only mothers understand. As for me, I went back to my garden, planted new roses where the old ones had withered. The soil felt like healing, messy, slow, but alive. One morning. In spring, I found a small envelope slipped under my door. Inside was a receipt from the bank. A deposit, not withdrawal. $500 in my account. The sender, Jessica H. There was no note, no message, just that. I smiled, not because of the money, but because it meant she was trying. Maybe that was her way of saying sorry, of starting over, even from a distance. And in that moment, I realized something. Forgiveness isn't about letting someone back in. It's about setting yourself free from the weight they left behind. Now, when I think back to that day, the wedding, the whispers, the card under the table, I no longer feel anger. Just gratitude. Because it showed me what love looks like when it's true, and what it becomes when it's not. It reminded me that kindness must have boundaries, and that peace comes when you finally stop trying to fix what doesn't want to be repaired. That night, as the sun dipped behind the hills, I sat by the window again, the same spot where it all began. The teacup was warm in my hands. The sky outside was quiet, painted with gold and lavender, and for the first time in a long while, I felt light. Not because the story ended happily, but because it ended honestly. You know, my dear, life has a way of teaching us lessons when we least expect them. When my daughter-in-law shouted that morning, "Darling, your mom changed the password. I can't use her card anymore." I didn't think it would become the moment that changed our family forever, but maybe that's how truth works. It doesn't knock politely. It slips in through chaos, through arguments, through silence, through moments that hurt more than we think we deserve. I've come to learn that generosity without boundaries isn't kindness, it's surrender. And when you give too much of yourself, people forget that you're human too. I used to think keeping peace meant keeping quiet, that if I just stayed kind, they'd understand my heart. But peace built on silence doesn't last. It only grows resentment in the shadows. Now, I keep my heart open, but my door is locked. I give, but wisely. And when someone crosses a line, I remind myself that no is also an act of love. Love for myself. If you've ever felt taken advantage of by family, if your kindness has been mistaken for weakness, I want you to know this. You're not cruel for setting limits. You're not selfish for wanting respect. And walking away from manipulation isn't revenge. It's healing. Sometimes, the best way to love someone is to stop letting them hurt you. These days, when I see my son smile again, I know we've both learned something important. Forgiveness isn't about pretending it didn't happen. It's about choosing to move forward without carrying the bitterness. Because peace doesn't come when everyone apologizes. It comes when you decide to stop bleeding for people who never noticed you were hurt. So tell me, my dear, what would you have done in my place? Would you have changed the password too? Or yet silent to keep the peace? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if my story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe, because every week I share a piece of truth, one story at a time. After all, sometimes healing begins the moment we finally tell our side.